After Harrison was disfigured while saving his first love, I cried heartbreakingly in the hospital, constantly asking the doctor if his face could be treated. Everyone thought I was a love-struck fool, madly in love with him. Only Harrison's younger brother handed me a tissue and smiled. "Sister-in-law, my brother's face can't be treated. You might as well choose me. My face looks more like Quincy's than my brother's right now." Harrison was hospitalized for 3 days, and his first love never visited him. Only I went to change his dressings and bring him meals every day. The car hit us too fast. Harrison instinctively lunged to protect Sherry. Under his protection, Sherry only sustained minor injuries. Meanwhile, I was lucky to have hidden in the back seat and only suffered a scraped arm. Only Harrison was cut by the flying glass when he lunged forward to shield Sherry. The shards sliced from his brow to his mouth, almost ruining his face. The doctor said that even if the wound healed, it would leave scars. But I didn't believe it. I ran from hospital to hospital, even seeking out traditional Chinese medicine. But the final responses were all the same: unless he underwent plastic surgery, the scars would never go away. I cried in the hospital, tearing my heart out, drawing everyone's attention. Harrison couldn't help it anymore and asked me while I was changing his bandages, "Yvonne, do you really love me that much? If your face is ruined, I wouldn't want to live either." I sobbed, looking at his face with pity and sadness. "Stop crying, it looks too ugly." Harrison wanted to wipe my tears but ultimately didn't, giving a sarcastic smile. "Can't tell, huh? The beauty of Peking University is a love-struck fool too. Between Harrison and me, he was the one who pursued me first." I treated him coldly, giving him no warm expression, but I couldn't stop his passion. No matter the weather, Harrison consistently accompanied me to the cafeteria and back to my dorm. Finally, on Valentine's Day, I accepted his confession and officially became his girlfriend. But after a year of dating, everything changed when Sherry returned to the country. Harrison started nitpicking at me, complaining about my family background, and saying I wasn't gentle enough. He would explode at me for no reason, humiliating my appearance. He even left me alone on the roadside when I was sick. Before the accident, Harrison had already mentioned breaking up, but I hadn't agreed. "Are you shameless? I already mentioned breaking up, and you're still taking care of me." Harrison said that, but looking at my red eyes from crying, he paused, then continued, "Fine, if you really can't accept it, I won't break up." I didn't catch what he said, just staring at Harrison's face, choking out, "Harrison, can't you get plastic surgery? Harrison?" Because of what I said, Harrison ignored me again. After finishing my part-time job at the convenience store, I rushed to the market and bought half a pig's head. 50 yuan was a bit pricey, taking up half a day's wages, and I reluctantly bought it with tears in my eyes. That evening, when Harrison saw the plate of pig head meat, he exploded in anger, refusing to eat. I tried to persuade him. "Eat what you should eat, don't be picky." Harrison's face was gloomy, but under my expectant gaze, he reluctantly ate. Before I left, I told him I wouldn't come tomorrow because I had something to do and that he should find someone else to take care of him. "What do you mean? Don't you love me? It's only been a few days, and you're unwilling to come?" Harrison's expression changed drastically, immediately starting to blame me, even refusing to take his medicine. I had no choice but to push back my part-time job for the next day and coaxed Harrison for a long time before he calmed down. A week later, when Harrison was discharged from the hospital, I helped him pack his things. "Oh, someone introduced me to a very famous doctor. Come with me to see him tomorrow," I said. Harrison was unwilling at first, scolding me for being troublesome, but under my persistence, he reluctantly agreed. The next morning, I waited at Harrison's door. I stood outside in the scorching sun for an hour before Harrison finally emerged slowly. Before leaving, Harrison took a phone call. After hanging up, he looked at me with a cold tone. "I'm not going. Sherry said she couldn't get a taxi and asked me to pick her up. You can go home by yourself." I was taken aback and instinctively replied, "But that doctor is only available today, he'll return to the US tomorrow. If I'm not going, then I'm not going. Why are you so chatty? Sherry called me, so how could I not go? Harrison's tone was impatient. I fell silent, murmuring, "Can't she take the bus? She hasn't seen you in so long, but now she calls you when something happens. Enough. Why are you so petty? Sherry is too spoiled to take the bus. Also, stop bringing up the car accident. You weren't even injured, were you? I've already agreed not to break up with you. What more do you want?" Harrison made me feel like an unreasonable shrew. He pushed me out of the car. In the end, he casually said goodbye and drove away. I stood under the hot sun again, watching Harrison's car disappear for a long time, until I heard movement behind me. I turned around and saw a man who looked about 80% like Harrison walking out of his house. Let me introduce myself. I'm Harrison's younger brother, Ethan. Ethan looked to be just over 20, smiling brightly and tilting his head at me. I heard my brother got disfigured in this car accident. Sister-in-law, you'd be better off choosing me. My face right now looks more like Quincy's than my brother's. Ethan drove me back to school, and after getting out of the car, I sincerely thanked him. Although it was our first meeting, I had a decent impression of him. After all, he saved me 3 yuan on the bus fare. Sister, think about it some more. I'm just as good as my brother. Ethan blinked, his eyes sparkling like a puppy. What's your educational background? Cambridge undergraduate. I politely indicated, you're too well educated, it doesn't seem right. Ethan was taken aback. Quincy? Or? I shyly pressed my lips together and said, vocational school, the kind that didn't go to university. I studied exceptionally hard and consistently ranked in the top 3 in my grade. I passed the high school entrance exam and got into the best school in the city, Chicago. But Quincy was different from me. He always scored at the bottom and ended up in the notorious 3rd high school known for its delinquents. He got into a conflict right after entering school and was reported by the entire school, a backup for the gangsters on the street. After an awkward silence, Ethan said, "It's okay, I'm graduating next year, and right now my education level is the same as his high school." Before Ethan left, he added me on social media, his profile picture featuring a curly-haired puppy. I clicked on his profile. It was full of lifestyle photos, hiking, skiing, and playing basketball. Ethan had a great photography skill, showcasing the best features of his face. I couldn't help but like a few pictures and saved a couple. During the break after the major course, I called Harrison again. He hadn't responded to my calls for days, not picking up or replying. Now that the weather was hot, I was worried he wouldn't take his medicine on time and that his wound would become inflamed, so I called him whenever I had a chance. This time he picked up quickly, and I immediately expressed my concern about his face, asking how his wound was healing. At first, Harrison seemed impatient and scolded me, but after a while, he sent me a message. "It's Chishi today, dress beautifully and come out for a date." I rummaged through my wardrobe back at the dorm, but I couldn't find anything suitable. Seeing my disappointed expression, my roommates volunteered to lend me their clothes and do my makeup. "Yvonne, you're so beautiful. You look stunning, like a fairy descended from heaven." A person who had never dressed up suddenly looked amazing, causing a tremendous effect. My roommates' eyes sparkled with excitement as they rushed to take selfies with me. "Girl, you must have mesmerized your boyfriend. If he doesn't faint, I'll lose." With my roommates cheering me on, I took a deep breath and stepped out the door. To avoid ruining my carefully styled hair, I gave up on riding a shared bike. After comparing 3 apps, I painfully chose Baidu Taxi. When I arrived at the designated place, Harrison had already been waiting impatiently for a long time. He was tall and handsome, looking good even in casual attire. However, when he turned around, his head was wrapped in bandages, giving him a somewhat cyberpunk appearance. As I walked closer, Harrison stared at me for a long time without speaking, and when he came to his senses, his voice was hoarse. "This is the first time I've seen you made up, it's really..." Before he could finish, a sweet voice interrupted, "Harrison." We both turned around to see Sherry, dressed in designer clothes and high heels. As soon as Sherry approached and saw what I was wearing, she frowned. Yvonne, I know you're poor, but you can't wear a knockoff. Isn't that dress a replica of XX's latest design? This dress was randomly bought online by my roommate, and as a college student, I had no idea about high-end custom designs versus replicas. In that moment, I felt little embarrassment from Sherry's comment. But Harrison's face fell instantly, and he glared at me before walking up to her. Sherry, didn't you say you weren't coming? I thought you were busy. I was busy at noon, but now I'm free. Let's eat, and then I want to go shopping. Okay, what do you want to buy, a necklace or some clothes? Just swipe my card. Harrison spoke sweetly to Sherry, chatting with her as if I didn't exist. When Sherry impatiently urged Harrison, he finally seemed to remember me. Casually waving his hand, he didn't even look back. All right, you can go back now, I won't see you off. I held back my frustration but ultimately couldn't contain myself. Harrison, are you stupid? My canvas bag was heavy with a power bank and an umbrella. I swung the bag at Harrison a few times, leaving him dazed. Why didn't the car accident kill you last time? After giving him a fierce kick and throwing that line at him, I walked away. Walking down the street, I looked at my outfit. My roommate had lent me her prettiest dress. The makeup was done with her newly bought foundation that she hadn't used yet. All this was wasted because of Harrison, and I had to take the bus back to school. The more I thought about it, the more regretful I became. I should have at least made Harrison reimburse the taxi fare. Annoying. While waiting for the bus, a black car suddenly pulled up, and the window rolled down. Ethan, with his blonde hair, smiled brightly from the driver's seat. Hey, why do you look so beautiful today? Want to hop in? How about I treat you to dinner? Ethan was completely different from his brother. He watched me awkwardly cut the steak without any unusual reactions. He naturally cut his steak and swapped it with mine. Unlike Harrison, who laughed heartily at my clumsiness, Ethan simply smiled. He even sent a message, "Wow, the first time I've seen someone eat a medium steak." He jokingly asked if I wanted him to get me a pair of chopsticks. At that moment, I thought about slapping the steak onto his face. But Harrison's smile resembled Quincy's so much, even the arc of his raised eyebrows was similar. At that time, Quincy and I collected plastic bottles to sell. We managed to buy a steak combo for that. Quincy had frowned, cutting it for ages, getting impatient, and called the waiter for 2 pairs of chopsticks. Is this really steak? This little bit of meat for such a high price? Quincy complained, and I nodded in agreement. I ate most of that steak. Quincy only finished the salad they served. It had always been like this. Quincy would fiercely give me the good things he found. So seeing Ethan smile so much like Quincy made me dazed. I didn't care about Harrison's mocking at all, just gently looking at Ethan and saying, anything is fine. That rumor had spread all over the school, and my roommates knew about it too. They rushed over, asking if Harrison was bullying me and urging me to break up with him. I sighed, resting my chin on my hand, but I can't bear to part with his face. Originally scolding, my roommates fell silent. After looking at Harrison for a long time, they scratched their heads. He is indeed quite handsome, but little Yvonne, we can't keep such a person with bad character. We can't let love cloud our judgment. At this moment, watching Ethan gently cut my steak, I couldn't help but get lost in thought. Harrison's temper was like Quincy, stubborn and spirited, ready to fight at the slightest disagreement. But his brother was currently showing tenderness and consideration. But I felt it seemed more like the attitude Quincy I knew had towards me. Ethan noticed my gaze and intentionally showcased his newly dyed hair. I specially dyed it. What do you think? Doesn't it look more like my brother? Ethan leaned closer to me, his eyes reflecting an aggression that didn't match his puppy-like appearance. In a low tone, almost seductive, he murmured, "Sister, choose me. I promise to love you more than my brother." I felt enchanted by those eyes, involuntarily allowing him to come closer. Just as Ethan's lips were about to touch mine, my phone suddenly rang, the harsh ringtone snapping me back to reality. I avoided Ethan's approach, and a flicker of disappointment flashed in his eyes. The caller ID showed Harrison, and as soon as I answered, I heard his furious voice. Yvonne, where the hell are you right now? I looked up and met Harrison's furious gaze not far from the restaurant. Oh boy, it had to be said, these two really were brothers. They could even book the same restaurant to take a girl out. Harrison strode over, shoving Ethan aside with one hand. His gaze swept over us, demanding answers urgently. What the hell are you doing together? Ethan was slightly pushed back but laughed nonchalantly. Bro, we just bumped into each other for dinner, why are you so anxious? Harrison's voice rose sharply. Dinner? You're about to kiss, for God's sake. At that moment, Sherry, who had been trailing behind, caught up. Seeing the tense atmosphere between the two brothers, she shot me a fierce glare. Why are you yelling? Are we still eating or what? Harrison hesitated, but he had always been submissive to Sherry, so his attitude softened. Sherry, don't be angry, be a good girl and order first. I'll come over once I finish handling this. After managing to shoo Sherry away, Harrison's expression darkened as he looked at me, sneering. Yvonne, I'm giving you a chance to explain, what just happened? Who allowed you to go on a date with another man behind my back? Bro, it was my invitation to Yvonne, I just saw a piece of paper stuck in her hair. Ethan didn't want me to be put in a tough spot and stepped forward to explain to his brother. Harrison continued to sneer, even so, Yvonne, you shouldn't have agreed to it. Are you that desperate? If I don't eat with you, you'll immediately flirt with another guy. Harrison's unfinished words vanished under the force of my slap. I never intended to hit him. But now, seeing his bandaged face, I felt no pity. Without holding back, I slapped him hard enough that my palm stung. Frowning, I turned to look at Ethan and said, Hey, help me hit your brother, and I'll agree to date you. Harrison already had a hurt face, and now it was spinning from pain. But upon hearing my words, he looked down at me disdainfully. He's my brother, how can he listen to your nonsense? Before he finished, he received a heavy punch to the face. Ethan's voice came through, tinged with some regret. I didn't want to fight, but I can live without my brother but not without my girlfriend. I can't offend my brother. As he spoke, he landed another fierce punch. 2 weeks later, Harrison was back in the hospital. I visited him once. The doctor said his facial wounds had become inflamed again and would likely leave scars. When I arrived, Harrison's eyes lit up at first, then he arrogantly looked away. This time, even if you kneel down and beg me, I'll definitely break up with you. Fine. I didn't even listen to what he said next and threw the only gift he ever gave me, a balloon-decorated bear keychain, right at him. I smiled and said, Harrison, remember this, whoever doesn't break up is a dog. Harrison's face suddenly turned dark, gripping the bear tightly until his palm bled. But I had already left. In the second month of dating Ethan, I noticed he was intentionally mimicking Quincy's every move. He discarded his suits and swapped them for cheap black tank tops. Our work and date locations shifted from upscale restaurants to bustling snack streets. I could no longer hold back and asked, How do you know Quincy? This was something Harrison didn't know, nor did my roommates. They only knew I was an inspirational student from a remote mountainous area who had gotten into Peking University. How did Ethan know, and how could he imitate him so well? At that moment, Ethan was carefully steaming utensils for me. Hearing my question, he paused. After a long silence, he spoke softly. You really don't remember me. The Harrison family only became wealthy in recent years. My brother was taken along by our parents since childhood while I stayed in our hometown for school. I studied at Shuqingigao for 3 years too. But back then, you couldn't see me, your eyes were only on Quincy. Quincy was quite famous in high school. He was known for his good looks and fighting skills. People said he was unruly, getting into conflicts as soon as he stepped into school, making it known to everyone. The girl sitting behind me said she saw a group of delinquents smoking outside an internet cafe after school, and Quincy was among them. I saw they were holding sticks, it was scary. So when Quincy came to pick me up after school that afternoon, I looked at his back as he casually held my backpack with one hand, biting my lip. Don't get into fights anymore. Quincy turned to look at me, and I noticed the faint bruise on his forehead. It had been carefully covered up, barely noticeable unless you looked closely. Quincy walked over, put his arm around my shoulder, and smiled. Kid, still want to meddle in your brother's affairs? I didn't say anything and forcefully pushed his arm away, turning my head. This was how I showed my anger, and Quincy paused for a moment. I continued, lowering my voice. What's so great about fighting? You get hurt all over, is it for money? Or do you think it's cool or handsome? Do you want to be like Gao Chiqiang, a big brother leading a group of younger ones? Fight for a lifetime. Quincy covered my mouth, a bit embarrassed and angry. Okay, I won't go anymore. Be careful, I might hit you. We fell into silence, walking forward. I kept my head down and eventually said, for people like us, studying is the only way out. The premise of being reckless is having family support. We were destined not to have that. What kind of people were Quincy and I? Both of us knew the answer. Quincy's gaze was fixed ahead, unblinking, with light and shadow filtering through the leaves and falling into his hair. He said, since you know this, you should also understand that you need to study hard and leave here. After dinner that night, I carefully applied medicine to his facial injuries. Quincy closed his eyes, the sharpness in his brow softening a bit, appearing somewhat docile in the sunset. I heard you didn't even score 400 on the recent monthly exam, I commented mercilessly. Quincy, are you an idiot? I scored higher than you even with one subject missed. Quincy seemed not to hear, hissing in pain as I applied the medicine, asking me to be gentler. I ignored him and finished applying the ointment. We sat together, watching the sunset gradually descend. In a year, we'll have the college entrance exam. I wonder what the future holds. I turned to look at Quincy. His pupils were amber, clear and transparent, yet also seemed indifferent and calm. I intertwined my fingers with his, resting on his knee. I ranked first in class again this time. The teacher said my grades are stable, and it's possible to get into the best universities in the country. Today's sunset was exceptionally vibrant, with passers-by around us taking photos with their phones. Such a beautiful scene naturally lightened the mood, and I said, actually, it doesn't matter. I'll go to Peking University, and you can go to Peking University Qingyao, it's not a big difference. Quincy laughed in anger and squeezed my fingers tightly. You're getting better at being sarcastic. But Quincy knew that wasn't what I meant. After a while, he gently rubbed my fingers, which had turned red from his grip. Quincy looked at the disappearing sun, and for some reason, whether it was the stillness of the air or something else, his voice sounded particularly soft. I know, we need to go to Beijing together. In my senior year of high school, I became entangled with the well-known rich second-generation student Felix. Outside the school gate, Quincy grabbed Felix's arm forcefully, warning him, stay away from her. Felix was a bit scared of him but still defiant, saying, who do you think you are? Mind your own business. No matter how you put it, I'm better than you, a thug. Yvonne wants to get into a good school. Why should she hang out with someone like you? Quincy's expression turned cold, frighteningly fierce as he said, I said, stay away from her. I was worried Quincy and Felix might fight, and since people were already starting to look over, I turned to Felix and said, stop bothering me, or I'll tell your family about you. Felix shivered, he feared his strict father the most. I pulled Quincy and hurried away, and as expected, Felix didn't chase after us. Don't listen to his nonsense, I've never thought you were bad. Quincy was unusually silent, and I guessed he might be affected by Felix's words. I took the initiative to grab his wrist and smiled at him. Don't listen to him, don't be angry, Quincy, Quincy G.E.? Quincy? I called out in various ways for a long time, making a funny face in front of Quincy. Finally, he smiled and opened the bag he had been tightly gripping behind his back. I exclaimed in surprise, it's the flour cakes from Shijia. Quincy rubbed my head. Yeah, eat it. He pulled out some money, a handful of crumpled bills 5, 10, and scattered small change and stuffed it into my pocket, then took out a few new reference books and shoved them into my backpack. Eat well, or I'll be waiting to hit you. After Quincy stopped fighting, he started helping people fix phones, watches, and toys. He was naturally sensitive to electronics, able to score 120 in math but barely getting 30 in English. His slender fingers bore old scars that would never fade and new, tiny scratches. What others considered ordinary pocket money was hard-earned for him, especially in this sensitive and prideful teenage period. He would scrimp and save over 3 or 5 yuan in front of his classmates, which silently made him feel small. I didn't want to take it, but I knew Quincy had 1,000 ways to make me accept it, so I said, okay. Since Quincy's grades weren't good, I aimed to get into the best university. To graduate with the best grades and find the best job. I unfolded the money carefully, pressing it flat, and put it into my old piggy bank. We would eventually go to Beijing together, it didn't matter whether it was kept with me or him. Quincy and I had relied on each other since we were in the orphanage. Quincy protected me from the orphanage to middle school, then from middle school to high school. In the soil where we grew up together, hidden feelings of love blossomed. I didn't know who took the initiative first, but in the swift passage of time, our frail hands had intertwined. I made a wish under the brilliant fireworks on New Year's Eve. I wish everyone in the orphanage peace and safety. May all the brothers, sisters, uncles, and aunts who donate be happy. I stole a glance at Quincy and greedily made a second wish. I wish Quincy everything goes smoothly in the future and soars high. So sometimes I felt I was too greedy, angering the heavens. But the heavens got the wrong person and brought disaster upon Quincy. Quincy got into a fight and ended up in the hospital, and the person he fought with was Felix. Felix had broken a rib and remained unconscious for 2 days. His father was furious and used his connections to threaten Quincy with juvenile detention. When I arrived at the hospital, Quincy was staring down at the doctor as he changed the dressing, lost in thought. The thick plaster cast on his right hand looked clumsy and ridiculous. I rushed to the doctor, gripping the sleeve of his coat, my hands shaking. Will his hand recover? He's supposed to take the college entrance exam. The doctor looked at me with pity and shook his head. The injury will take at least 6 months to heal, and since he injured the nerves in his right hand, even if it heals, he won't be able to grip a pen properly. My nose tinged with bitterness and I nearly cried. Quincy noticed I was there but didn't react, still keeping his head down. I walked in front of Quincy, tears dripping to the floor, and he spoke first. I couldn't keep my promise. I fought again. I was restless by nature and loved to lie, never able to follow through on my promises. Quincy finally raised his head and I noticed the bloodshot in his eyes. His amber pupils seemed to be shrouded in a layer of dust. Quincy spoke, his tone calm. Yvonne, let's break up. We're not suitable. Quincy was sent to juvenile detention for 6 months and I tried to visit him as a family member several times. Each time, Quincy refused. On the last occasion, I stood up and shouted loudly inside, using all my strength, Quincy, I'll wait for you to come out. I didn't know if Quincy could hear me. A staff member quickly came over to pull me out. I lowered my voice, murmuring, forever. One day, when I was daydreaming in class again, the homeroom teacher called me to the office, holding my report card and sighing. Yvonne, you've fallen out of the top 50 in your grade since the last monthly exam. Are you having any difficulties in your studies? You can talk to me. I kept my head down and didn't say anything. The teacher patted my shoulder. You're the most likely person in our class to get into Peking University. I hope you can adjust quickly. The college entrance exam is too important and could determine a person's life. I understand, teacher. I will adjust. From that day on, I studied harder, dismissing all other thoughts. I concentrated all my attention on studying and my grades quickly improved. But I knew those sour, panicky emotions hadn't disappeared. They were just buried deep inside my heart. I didn't share with anyone, nor did I need anyone's comfort. I was waiting for Quincy to come out, waiting to go to Beijing together, waiting for the world that awaited us. On the day Quincy got out, I took a day off from school. I waited early at the gate of the juvenile detention center, from morning until dark. I couldn't help but ask the staff, who thought for a moment, "Oh, that Quincy, he performed well inside and got out 2 weeks early." For a moment I couldn't steady myself. Quincy was out earlier, but he didn't return to the orphanage. Where did he go? Why didn't he come to find me? I recalled the last thing Quincy said to me: "Yvonne, let's break up, we're not suitable." The staff saw me suddenly crouch down and screamed to pull me up. I looked up and he noticed that my face was already covered in tears. I went to Quincy's school to inquire, only to find out he had dropped out. I then contacted a few of his old friends. After a lot of back and forth, I finally got a lead. As night fell, the auto repair shop lit up with orange-yellow lights. There weren't many people, and the boss, with a crew cut, squatted on the ground, shouting inside, "Quincy, bring me the wrench." Someone inside responded and came out, with hair long enough to cover his eyebrows. He walked over silently and, together with the boss, worked hard to take off a damaged tire. I noticed his right hand was hidden in his sleeve. When he extended it with force, it would tremble uncontrollably, but Quincy maintained an unchanged expression, shifting most of the weight to his left hand. I crouched behind a big tree, watching for a long time. After Quincy greeted the boss and finished work, he grabbed a worn-out bag and walked out. I pursed my lips and followed him. I followed Quincy through a few streets, and he suddenly stopped, turning his back to me and saying coldly, "Come out." I paused for a moment and slowly walked out. When Quincy turned around and saw me, his tightly clenched fists relaxed, and we stood facing each other in eerie silence. "You're out." I broke the silence first, clutching the hem of my clothes and softly asking, "Why didn't you come to find me?" In the moonlight, Quincy resembled a silent statue. After a while, he spoke but didn't answer my question. "I heard you found your parents. They came all the way from Beijing to look for you. Is that true?" "Yes. A week ago, the aunt from the orphanage told me my parents had found me." I initially didn't believe it, but when I met the couple, seeing the well-maintained middle-aged woman with a face so similar to mine, my heart raced uncontrollably, and tears fell. Yvonne's family was well off. After I went missing, my parents had been searching for me. When they finally found me, my mother hugged me and cried until she nearly fainted. My father, strict and reserved, showed signs of tears in his eyes as he looked at my worn-out clothes. His voice choked as he patted my shoulder, repeatedly saying, "Good, good, it's great that we found you." They were about to take me back to Beijing, but I asked them to wait a bit. They needed to prepare the documents to transfer my household registration, so my father went back to Beijing first. My mother stayed behind to accompany me and would come back to pick us up later. "Are they treating you well?" "They're pretty good." Quincy fell silent again, and I took a few steps forward. "I told them to take you with me. There are still 3 months until the college entrance exam. If it doesn't work out this year, we can always try again next year. We can repeat a year and take the exam again, it's not too late." Quincy shook his head, lowering his eyes. "No need, I can't hold a pen." He looked at me, his voice overly calm. "Yvonne, you shouldn't care about me anymore. Go back to your life. You were supposed to be born in Beijing, living as the carefree young lady of the Yvonne family. What good would it do to bring me along? What identity, what reason do I have? We've already broken up, Yvonne. When will you realize that?" I felt like my heart was being gripped tightly by a hand, a numb, dull pain spreading rapidly through me. I blinked back tears and questioned him, "But Quincy, do you want to stay here forever? Do you want to be a mechanic for the rest of your life?" The night wind ruffled my hair, and Quincy looked down at the oil smeared on his clothes. It was a black stain, pungent and dirty. Even after washing with detergent, it would leave gray traces. "What's wrong with being a mechanic? Free food and accommodation, plus a salary, it's enough to support myself." In the park, a group of older women was dancing with a speaker playing music. I gently spoke up, "If your right hand doesn't work, then learn to write with your left. If your English is bad, I'll accompany you to memorize vocabulary every day." Quincy stood still, and tears fell from my eyes one by one, choking me. "Everything can be solved, Quincy. Can we meet in Beijing?" I saw Quincy's fingers tremble, and he lifted his head. The shadows of the trees made it hard for me to see his expression, and after a long pause, his voice came through. "But, Yvonne." Quincy smiled, his tone flat. "I think learning to repair cars with my left hand is easier than learning to write with it." Quincy was a master of lies, so I didn't believe a single word he said. So, every day after school, I went to find Quincy. But Quincy didn't want to see me and deliberately avoided me. I decided to sit under the big tree, lying on a bench to do my homework. I waited until the sun set, until it was completely dark. Finally, someone stood in front of me. Quincy was looking down, his voice somewhat cold. "What are you doing out here in the middle of the night?" I looked up and smiled at Quincy, softly saying, "I'm waiting for you to take me home." Quincy didn't respond and picked up my backpack, walking ahead. I hurried to catch up. XX Hotel. It was the most expensive and luxurious hotel in our city. Quincy didn't stop walking, his voice came from ahead. "After I take you home, don't come looking for me again. This place is filled with unsavory characters, it's not where you should be." I pressed my lips together and reached out to touch Quincy's wrist. He stiffened for a moment, but the next second, he pulled away. I said, "You shouldn't be here either. This is where I work, why shouldn't I be here?" "But you're only 18. I shouted at Quincy. He stopped, and we had already reached the entrance of the hotel. My voice softened. "I'm going back to Beijing in 3 days, Quincy. Will you come with me?" Quincy turned around and handed me my backpack. "No." He took a few steps. People's hearts are fickle. The words spoken in youth can't be taken seriously. "Yvonne, you shouldn't indulge me. Go back to Beijing, focus on your college entrance exam, and live well with Quincy." I suddenly shouted to stop him, and Quincy paused but didn't turn around. I closed my eyes, then opened them again, saying each word slowly. "But your hand was injured because of me." The mood of a teenager is most unpredictable. When he couldn't get what he wanted, he would become angry and embarrassed. He would threaten to make me cry and beg him to be his girlfriend. At school, he would lead the isolation, making snide remarks. Outside of school, he paid thugs to intimidate me. I hid the torn pages of my notes at the very bottom of my backpack. I lied to Quincy that there were evening classes and pretended not to hear the taunts from the thugs on the street. But Quincy seemed to notice. I could never hide anything from him. Yet I kept silent, and he also played along, pretending not to know, until one time, I was cornered by a group of thugs, and they hurled filthy words at me, even trying to grab my wrist. I picked up a stone from the ground and struck the leading thug hard on the head, causing it to bleed profusely. That night, I woke up with a start, afraid of waking anyone, and stepped outside to cry in a corner. After crying, I wiped my tears and silently encouraged myself. "Don't worry, the college entrance exam is coming soon, I won't see these people again." But I didn't expect Quincy to go find Felix the next day. Felix scolded Quincy for being a poor, low-class person. He accused me of pretending to be high and mighty, saying I had seduced him first. Quincy rushed forward with red eyes. No one expected a high school student to carry a knife with him. Felix, stirred up by the fight, plunged a knife into Quincy's right hand. Quincy's right hand was long and thin, with dark red scars on his index and middle fingers. The palm had scratches left by repair tools. There were calluses on his thumb, clearly a sign of hardship. This hand no longer resembled a boy's hand, it looked like an adult's hand. Now, due to nerve damage, it trembled uncontrollably. He could no longer grip a pen or do delicate work. The spirited boy injured his hand, ended up in juvenile detention, and his last words to me were to break up. I choked up and asked Quincy, "Do you regret fighting Felix for me?" No one answered, and the figure in front of me grew farther away. My vision blurred more and more, and my mother, Yvonne, worried about me. She waited for me at the hotel entrance, and when she saw me like this, she hurried over. "What happened?" I dashed into her embrace. My mother's warm hug felt like endless acceptance. I cried bitterly, my heart aching as if it had been struck by a bullet, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. "Mom, he doesn't want me anymore. I'm a sinner." Yvonne's mother didn't understand what I was saying. She felt heartbroken and didn't know what to do. As a mother, she too was stirred by emotions, her voice choking as she kept saying to just go home. This time, I didn't refuse. I followed Yvonne's parents back to Beijing. "That's how it is. There's nothing more to say about my relationship with Quincy." I spoke calmly, looking at Ethan's profile in the sunlight. Ethan said, "Since you've returned to the Yvonne family, why do you look?" I knew he wanted to ask why my life still seemed so strained. But at that moment, Harrison, whom I hadn't seen in a long time, suddenly appeared before me. Once a well-groomed young master of the Harrison family, he now looked somewhat disheveled. He looked at me, still wanting to put on airs, using a condescending tone. "You know you should apologize to me. After all, I'm still your boyfriend." But I was lost in memories, feeling anything but calm, so I didn't even raise my head to respond to him. Harrison paused, and just as I thought he was about to explode like before, I heard his voice suddenly soften, an unusual humility in his tone. "All right, stop throwing a tantrum, Sherry has already left. Is it worth being angry for so long?" I realized he was here because Sherry had gone abroad again, and that was why he came to reconcile with me. I let out a cold laugh, no longer wanting to pretend, and spoke straightforwardly. "I don't want to see your disfigured face. Why do you think I should recycle trash that Sherry doesn't want?" Harrison's face paled, and he rushed forward. "But you were so worried about me in the hospital. Since you didn't hold the car accident against me, why do you care about the Chishi incident?" I didn't want to get entangled with Harrison again. "That was because I thought your face could still be saved." My gaze swept over Harrison's stiff body, and I commented, "You have no value except for that face. The only worth you have is that you somewhat resemble him. Too bad I don't want that anymore." I walked away, but I could still hear Harrison's roar behind me. He swept all the cups on the table to the ground, shouting in anger and heartbreak, "Yvonne, do you think I'm just a substitute for someone else?" I strolled along the lakeside with Ethan for a long time. I sighed. All right, no need to act anymore. I had already known Ethan's purpose. As the second son of the Harrison family, his rivalry with his brother was practically out in the open. He pursued me, claiming it was brave to chase after love, even if it was his brother's ex-girlfriend. Put simply, he was provoking me, using me to stomp all over Harrison's pride. "Miss Yvonne, I'm not." Harrison's pupils quivered, and he began to panic, trying to explain. But I just shook my head. When Harrison was hospitalized, and Ethan brought a group of people to visit him, I had already overheard their conversation. They mocked my infatuation, calling me a top-tier dog clown with poor taste. Ethan leaned against the wall, smoking, a smile on his lips. "What if I can get my brother's dog, then humiliate her in front of him? Do you think he'll go crazy?" The group exchanged glances. One hesitantly replied, "But what about her feelings for your brother?" Ethan crushed the cigarette but in the corner, "I don't believe she's truly devoted to my brother." Ethan laughed wildly, "I know her secret." Ethan's lips trembled. "I was just bragging, I didn't lie to you. I really studied at Shuqing No. 1 High School for 3 years. He reached out to grab me, but I gently dodged him." Ethan's face suddenly turned pale, but then he laughed. "All this talk about using and acting is just an excuse. You still can't forget Quincy, can you? Is a living person always inferior to a dead one?" The day after I returned to the Yvonne family, Charles, my biological younger brother, started crying and making a scene, insisting that I be sent away, even going so far as to threaten to starve himself. The 15-year-old boy, not knowing who told him, thought I had returned to compete with him for the Yvonne family fortune. The moment he saw me, he looked at me like an enemy, cursing me for being a despicable and cunning person. Yvonne's parents looked awkward, but their hearts had long favored their only son, who had grown up by their side. Yvonne's father gave me 200,000 as living expenses until I turned 18, somewhat guilty as he sent me back to Shucheng. It was at this moment that I realized I didn't have a home. On the afternoon I returned to Shucheng, I was cornered by a group of thugs. They grabbed my clothes, rummaged through my bag, demanding that I hand over the 200,000. I quietly watched them and suddenly understood why Charles had so easily allowed Yvonne's father to give me money. The thugs turned my backpack inside out but didn't find the bank card. In the end, they grinned maliciously as they approached me. I don't remember much of that day, just the blinding flash of countless camera lights. They took photos of me, threatening to spread them throughout Shucheng if I didn't hand over the bank card within 3 days. But this was never my fault. I didn't think it was my fault. I calmly gathered evidence and staggered to the police station to report the incident. All 5 thugs were sent to jail. Before they were caught, they looked at me with vicious eyes, shouting that they would kill me when they got out. I recorded a video of them as evidence, extending their sentences by several years. When Quincy found me, my photos had already spread all over the internet. Countless people commented, begging for pictures. Quincy held me tightly, his arms trembling. Those beasts deserve to be torn apart. Quincy looked at me, his eyes red. His usually straight back bent, and he choked out, "I'm sorry, it's my fault. I shouldn't have let you go." In comparison, I seemed calm, even comforting Quincy in return. "Their fault is not mine, I don't need to reflect with you." I wrote down the bloggers who spread my photos online. One by one, I sued them in court. In court, those people were still arguing that they were just curious. Under my cold gaze, they gradually fell silent. According to the extent of the dissemination, everyone received varying degrees of punishment. Quincy became more and more silent, coming home earlier and leaving later. I resumed my studies at Shucheng No. 1 High School. Whenever boys threw lewd looks my way, the girls scolded them one by one. The girls brought me various snacks and gifts every day. They spoke to me gently and tenderly, cautiously preserving my self-esteem. I didn't refuse anyone's kindness, smiling as I studied and did exercises, looking completely normal. After the college entrance examination ended, Quincy and I worked at a barbecue restaurant. Then the news came that the Yvonne family had a fire, their villa was completely burned down. Strangely, Yvonne's parents were unharmed, but Charles was crushed under the wall, leaving him with 2 broken legs. The Yvonne family was heartbroken, and seeing that Charles would not recover, they wanted to take me back home again. I refused. That 200,000 had brought me disaster and severed my family ties. At dinner, when Quincy stood up to wash the dishes, I asked, "What about that fire?" I paused and continued, "Do you know how it started?" Quincy didn't stop his movements, replying calmly, "Oh, I don't know, hasn't the police found out yet?" "Why do you ask?" I said, "It's nothing." The cause of the fire was no longer important. I didn't want to know where Quincy had disappeared to for 3 days. Those who did wrong should pay the price. After I was accepted into Peking University, the city government and various enterprises awarded me 300,000. Combined with that 200,000, I couldn't help but feel happy and rushed to find Quincy. "We have enough money, 500,000. That's enough for me to finish college and for us to settle down in Beijing." Quincy, while repairing a car, didn't stop and rarely smiled, telling me to keep it safe. "Save it in a fixed deposit. When you graduate, you can start a business or buy a house as you wish." Quincy even gave me all the money he had saved from repairing cars, 5 or 10 yuan at a time, accumulating to 10,000. At that moment, I was still immersed in the anticipation of a new life with Quincy. I couldn't see the tenderness and hidden affection in Quincy's eyes. Quincy asked me to go to university first. He needed a month to handle things at the repair shop. A month later, when I tried to call Quincy, it was already unreachable. When I hurried back to Shucheng, I heard the news that Felix had died. Felix was among the thugs from that incident. However, he had power and influence, bribing the thugs to ensure they would say he wasn't involved. Thanks to Felix's father's connections, he really managed to escape a catastrophe. The thugs who later came out either had mental illnesses or were on medical parole. They all gradually re-emerged within a few months. After those thugs were released, they sought me out multiple times, threatening to kill me and demanding 200,000. I told them to wait until I had more money when I was accepted into Peking University, trying to buy time. I considered giving them all the money to live peacefully, and I also thought about recording a video and suing them, seeking justice for a lifetime. I even contemplated giving up my studies and running away to a small county in the south to survive rather than be threatened like this. I always thought I was hiding it well, that Quincy was unaware of these matters. But I never imagined that at night, when I was awakened by nightmares and couldn't sleep, Quincy, just a wall away from me, would also lie awake until dawn, expressionless. After Felix, it was the 5 thugs. One by one, they met a horrific end, their faces twisted, their bodies dumped in the toilet. The day Quincy was arrested, I was in class at the university. The professor was very entertaining, and the students were laughing heartily. Only I felt an inexplicable thumping in my heart and couldn't smile. As I watched the birds fly by outside, I came to my senses, only to find tears streaming down my face. The last time I saw Quincy was at his funeral. A thin white cloth covered him, quietly laid on the ground. The staff looked worried at my expression, wanting to support me. I waved them off, slowly walking step by step to the white cloth. I thought I was strong, I thought I was calm. Back then, I had been bullied and photographed by those thugs, and I hadn't cried. I even lunged at them, biting their necks until they bled. But now, as I tried to reach out and touch that white cloth, I couldn't lift my hand after several attempts. When the staff suddenly held my shoulder, I realized my whole body was trembling. Why? Why? I muttered to myself. Quincy, why did you get to decide my matters? And why did you decide your life without consulting me? I couldn't hold back any longer, and the tears fell. Each drop stained that white cloth. It felt like being stabbed by thousands of swords in my heart. After the coldness came the most intense pain. I choked out, Quincy, I regret it. Once, Quincy held me, saying he regretted letting Yvonne's mother take me back to Beijing. Now, I regretted it. I regretted returning to Shucheng. I brought disaster back to Shucheng and brought it to Quincy. Quincy was a master of deception, promising to go to Beijing with me but never fulfilling it. And I was just an ungrateful sinner. I was the one who caused Quincy's death. After graduating from university, I joined a reputable third-tier hospital. 6 months later, when I saw Harrison again, he had taken over the Harrison family business. His facial injuries had healed completely, but his smile seemed a bit stiff. He looked at me, his tone cautious. I had plastic surgery, don't I look good? You can see me as him, as long as you're still willing to accept me. I was taken aback, letting out a wry laugh and shaking my head. Why bother? It had always been a mutual exploitation. He used my identity as a campus beauty to satisfy his vanity and provoke his white moonlight, Sherry. I treated him as a substitute to reminisce about someone I could never see again. What was the point of saying this now? In the second year of my job, the pandemic broke out. During the height of the crisis, I volunteered to support Wuhan. I urged the head nurse, who was competing for the same spot. You have a family, and your child is only 3. It's better for me to go. I have no attachments, and I'm the most suitable. After the pandemic, I went to aid in remote and impoverished areas like Qinghai, Tibet, and Hunan. There, I saw many children just like the old me and Quincy. I worked to connect resources, trying to ensure that all the children received funding to complete their education. Various enterprises actively responded, with the Harrison family providing the most support and the largest charitable contributions. After that, I began researching adolescent mental health issues. I published a series of books addressing the psychological harm caused by family backgrounds and school bullying. I collaborated with professionals to improve legal regulations and punishments related to juvenile crime. On weekends, I once again sat in front of Quincy's tombstone with a bouquet of flowers. I've done a lot, yet I feel like I haven't done enough. As usual, I chattered away, telling Quincy about my work and life. I told him about a girl I sponsored who got into Tsinghua University and even called me to share her joy. I also mentioned a seventh grade boy who was at the bottom of his class but loved tinkering with cars and parts. Just like you, at such a young age, he can spot issues that even the masters can't. I smiled softly, saying, I've thought it through. If he has talent, I'll find someone to teach him a skill. As light rain began to fall from the horizon, I quieted down. The air was still for a long time before I quietly said, what should I do? I still miss you so much. As the rain gradually picked up, droplets fell on my face. I stood up, turned around and walked a few steps, then looked back and smiled. Have I been doing well enough to earn your praise? That night, as I lay in bed, I hummed a tune and slowly drifted off to sleep. I knew I would soon see Quincy. I would show him the new sweater I knitted and the new hat I embroidered. He would gently pat my head and praise me for being wonderful. So tonight would be a good dream. Good night.